Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Wordfence Live. Protecting 4 million WordPress sites means that we see attacks coming at WordPress sites from around the world, and it means that we can translate that data into threat intelligence that protects the entire WordPress community. Today, we're talking about the 2020 Threat Report and actionable steps that you can take to protect your WordPress sites from these trending attacks. Stay tuned. We're going to be right back to get started. Welcome back, everyone, and thank you for joining us on Wordfence Live. Today is February 2nd. Let us know where you're viewing from. I am in the Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania area here. Nice and snowy out right now. If this is your first time joining us, my name is Scott Miller. I'm a customer support engineer here at Wordfence. Today, I will be joined by threat analysts Ram Gall and Chloe Chamberlain. Last week, the threat intelligence team posted a report detailing the biggest threats to WordPress that we saw in 2020. If you were on the mailing list, you saw this right away. You might have jumped over, checked out our blog post. This report was covered by a number of publications, including ZDNet, TechRadar, and Search Engine Journal, among others. Today, we're going to explore these threats. We're going to dive into them and give you the scoop on all of this. And we're going to get to how to protect your WordPress sites from these attacks that we've been seeing over the past year. You're not going to want to miss this. Last week, we mentioned a new program, if you were here, that was going over the launch of a K through 12 public school program where we are helping out with free site security audits and free site cleaning services from our Wordfence site cleaning team. We've begun working with a number of school districts, and if you're interested in more details on that program, you can find them on wordfence.com. We'll also be posting some links in the chat so that you can check that out if you're interested. Now, since we've launched that, we've had an immense amount of interest from people all over the world, and lots of people have been asking if we would be able to open this opportunity up for K through 12 schools in other areas. And we initially did not want to overwhelm our team, but thanks to the management team, we found a way to open this service to more schools. So we're thrilled to announce here on Wordfence Live that we can now offer site cleaning and site audit services to K through 12 government funded or state schools in any area, including the UK, Canada, Australia, and elsewhere. So if you know of a school that could use our expertise and use these services, please send them the link to our blog post. As I mentioned, you're going to be seeing that in the comments, and you can read through that. We're going to announce this officially later today, so you can read about it on our blog, get subscribed to the mailing list, and you'll get notified when that comes out. But you are hearing it here first, and that's one of the benefits of being here with us on Wordfence Live. You're getting the inside scoop on WordPress security and more. We're talking with our threat analysts every week here, so you're the first to know about these threats that are targeting WordPress, and that's what we're going to go over today. So if you're excited about the stream, please hit the like button below the video here. Let us know that you're interested in this content. Please hit the subscribe button. If you subscribe and hit the bell, you're going to be notified when we go live. Typically, we are live each Tuesday at noon Eastern Time, 9 a.m. Pacific. We're broadcasting to YouTube, so any comments that you post will be visible to the public. So if you have anything specific to your site, please go ahead and write into us directly. Maybe your site's hacked, maybe something fishy's going on the site. Rather than posting a link in the chat, go ahead and send us a message at feedback@wordfence.com, and you can use the subject line Wordfence Live. Let's get started initially by bringing in our threat analysts, Ram Gall and Chloe Chamberlain. How's it going, Ram?
Great. How are you, Scott?
Doing well here. How about you, Chloe?
Doing good. We're getting a lot of snow, so I'm really happy about that.
That is good. Yeah, we got a little bit here as well. I could do without it. I wish I could send some more your way.
I'll take it.
Before we get started here, one more announcement and an invitation to everybody. So if you're an iPhone user and you're on the new app Clubhouse, we're going to have a special Wordfence Live after show. assuming that everything is working as expected after the show on the app. So we're going to do just a short little after show that we have planned. So what you can do is search for Wordfence and find the room in the Clubhouse app. And this is an iOS app only. So if you're using iOS and you have a Clubhouse invitation, head on there and search for the Wordfence room. If you do
It works
not
on
have,
iPads too.
it does work on iPads, and Ram has been kind enough to test that for us. If you do not have a Clubhouse account and you're interested, you're going to want to check out the hashtag WordPress Clubhouse on Twitter. So if you have an invite to give to somebody here, you can post invite to give with the hashtag WordPress Clubhouse. And if you need an invite, you can post invite needed hashtag WordPress Clubhouse. We'll be putting those into the chat momentarily so you can copy and paste them. And hopefully you're able to get connected and get in there. And it's an audio only app, so we'll be talking over there shortly and go over a few things. So it'll be the first time for us doing that. Now we're going to get over to the swag question in a moment, but Ram, do you want to give us an overview? You had this post last week, I believe, that gained a lot of traction, a lot of interesting stuff. Do you want to get us started with an overview of what we're going to cover today and where we're going to get started?
Sure. So we protect north of 4 million sites. The actual number is going to change daily. But as a general rule, it's increasing. So that's why we say over 4 million sites. And this past month, I had a chance to look at all of our threat data from 2020 and kind of got a look at the sort of massive amounts of attacks we've blocked and the amount of malware we've detected. And kind of got a chance to see what the biggest threats facing WordPress sites in 2020 were based on that data. So that's what we're going to go over today. We're also going to cover what you can do about these threats, ways to protect your website from them. Yes, Wordfence does make it a lot easier to protect your site from these things. So we'll go over how you can do that. And Chloe's got some demos for that too, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Always love the demos. So let's get started with the swag question. For anybody who's prepared for that, you're going to be seeing a link. Remember that we ask that you answer this through the form. You'll include your email address. We'll get in contact with you if you are one of the first 5 to correctly answer the swag question, which today is, why does hiding the WordPress login page not stop brute force logins? So you'll be seeing a form there. You can click on and submit your answer to enter the contest there. And we're going to be going over a bunch of different types of attacks that we've seen over the past year. We're going to be demoing some, as Ram mentioned, and Chloe's going to be helping us with that. So Ram, Chloe, let's get started. Where do you want to start, Ram?
I think that maybe we should start with the first big threat that we see a lot of, and that's malicious login attempts. Now, these are kind of categorized under brute force attacks. But, a lot of these aren't just, trying every character combination. A lot of them, they'll, use lists of stolen credentials from other data breaches because a ton of people reuse their passwords. Or, they'll try dictionary attacks with, common combinations of words. But I guess the main story here is that Wordfence blocked more than 90 billion malicious login attempts from more than 57 million unique IP addresses. And that's more than 2,800 attacks per second. And bear in mind, we protect over 4 million websites, but that's still only a fraction of the actual number of WordPress sites out there. So attacking WordPress websites with malicious login attempts is huge. Just the total number of attacks is mind-blowing.
Yeah, it almost looks like a typo if we didn't know better. That's a large amount of attacks. And so before we go too far in, is there anything big that you've seen change from the previous year to this last year's report? Was there anything that really stood out to you?
So we did see an increase in XMLRPC attacks in general. I mean, generally speaking, those tend to make up the largest volume of malicious login attempts, and we'll kind of get to why in a little bit. But overall, this has been sort of consistently one of the largest attack vectors against WordPress historically. So what's really neat is that we have some really good ways of protecting your site against it. I mean, we've got brute force attack protection, which is very useful. But the thing about malicious logins is that an attacker only has to succeed once. And if they absolutely know your username and password, then there's still another layer of protection you can add, and that's two-factor authentication, which the Wordfence plugin offers for free, and we also have a free standalone plugin called Wordfence Login Security. And basically what happens with that is that you set it up, you scan a barcode on your site with your phone, and gives you this second code that changes every 30 seconds. And even if an attacker knows your username and password, if they don't have that second code, then they can't get into your site. I mean, this is not to say that you shouldn't change your passwords if they've been in a data breach, but it does give you a little bit of, time of like, oh no, my password was in a data breach. You still have some time to fix that before, you have to worry about attackers breaking down the doors.
And as you mentioned, it's not a replacement for complex and good passwords. It's another additional layer. And we do recommend TOTP-based apps rather than SMS-based 2FA, right, Ram?
Correct. TOTP is significantly more secure than SMS because SMS numbers can be, or SMS 2FA can be worked around by sufficiently savvy attackers. However, both of them will still stop 100% of automated login attempts. TOTP is basically, it's a time-based one-time password. Again, it's sort of, there's this cryptographic algorithm, and when you set it up on the Wordfence site, there's a sort of seed value that you use, and as long as both the site and the app on your phone have the same seed value, they can predict what the correct value is going to be for that time. So that's sort of a basic overview how it works.
Now, I know we got a few demos lined up here. Chloe, is there anything that you want to go over, Chloe or Ram, before we get into these demos?
I think just one other thing is that two-factor authentication can also help if you happen to have a vulnerable plugin that's vulnerable to privilege escalation, if you require it for all administrators. So if they're able to create a subscriber account, escalate their privileges to that of an administrator, I don't believe they'll be able to log on any further because you'll have two-factor authentication enabled for all administrators, and they'd have no way to set that up because they can't log in. That's correct, right?
That depends on whether or not you automatically have a grace period set up for administrators. That is on by default just because it can, make life difficult for any administrators who aren't set up. But you can turn it off, I believe. So.
Okay. Yeah.
And for anybody wondering, we have a number of authenticator apps that we have tested on our side for the 2FA, such as Google Authenticator. There's free OTP Authenticator, 1Password works, LastPass, Microsoft Authenticator. So you have a number of options to use whenever you set that up. And again, the 2FA is a free feature in Wordfence Security and the Wordfence Login Security plugin. And I know we're going to walk through the setup there. So if you're not currently set up with 2FA on your site, you can either follow along here in a few moments or get back to the video after the fact and set it up. We also have some other good videos on the YouTube channel that walks through some of this as well. So Chloe, do we want to jump over to the first of our demos?
Yeah. So I'll go ahead and share my screen. Put that over here. Let me just make it wide. So first you want to get to the two-factor authentication settings. So you'll go to Wordfence, and then you'll want to go to Login Security. So that's right here. And then what you want to do is you want to make sure you have an authenticator app installed on your phone or your iPod or your iPad or whatever device. I think there's desktop applications as well. But for today, I have it installed on my phone, and I have Google Authenticator. Don't know if you can see it that well. It's very white screen. But the first thing that you'll want to do is you want to click on this little plus here. I don't know if you can see that at all. There it is.
There it is.
Little plus button.
Yep.
And you'll click that and then scan QR code. There it is, that top one. And then you'll have this little handy dandy thing to scan. And then you'll go to that two-factor authentication page, and where it says scan code or enter key, you'll take that phone and you'll scan it real quick. And so now I have account added, and you can see that, and I'll have my initial two-factor authentication code that I used to set up. So what I'll want to do is I want to enter that over here in this little box, 793934. And what you need to do before you activate it is you need to download your backup keys. These are very important, your backup codes. They're very important because if your phone number changes, well, this isn't SMS based, so it doesn't really matter if your phone number changes. But if you can't get into your Authenticator app, or you lose your phone, or something breaks and you just can't get access to your Authenticator device, then you'll want to have these backup codes so that you can still log into your site with that two-factor authentication. So I downloaded those, and I'm going to go ahead and click activate. And so now two-factor authentication is enabled for me. So what you want to do is verify that it's working. So I'll go ahead and log out. I'll type in my username and password. And then it's going to ask me for my two-factor authentication code. Go ahead to my Authenticator app. And one
that
thing
is where you would put your backup code, right? In the event.
Correct,
that,
yeah. Yeah, so one thing I missed on the phone was that it said add account. So I went ahead and clicked add account. You'll want to do that. But now I have this little section for that site, and I have my Authenticator code there for me. So I'm going to go ahead and enter that to log into my site. Log in. And there we go. It's as simple as that. So it's really easy to set up. And then again, we'll go ahead and log out. And I'll show you how it works with that backup code real quick. So admin, root, I have a very strong password. Open this up. And so you have these backup codes. And what you can do is you can go ahead and just copy it, get rid of that, paste that there, and log in.
By
and
the
it
way,
works.
if you use, sorry.
Oh, no, you're fine.
If you use a password manager, that's a really great place to put those backup codes. And some password managers will even let you do the one-time password as well.
Yeah, I think 1Password is one of those.
Yep.
It's really nice. Yeah.
Yep. And after you use your backup codes, right in the login security section where you set up the 2FA, you can always go in and generate new backup codes after you use a few of them, and then you can save those and throw those into 1Pass. And you know, a lot of the time it's the last thing you're thinking of whenever you're getting a new device or a new phone, and then you go to log into your site and you don't have an easy way in. So there's a few ways that you can get in if you need to, but definitely good to keep the backup codes and use a different password than Sally's Catblog 123, if possible.
Yeah.
Although that's a little better than Chloe's current password, I think.
Yeah, a lot better. But yeah, here's that recovery code area. It says we have 4 unused, so it took note that that one was already used, and then you can just generate new ones there. And so that's how to do that. And the next thing we wanted to show you real quick is how XMLRPC works. It's something that's talked about when it comes to brute force, but if you don't know how it works, it's kind of hard to understand. So I am going to stop my screen just for a second here and get that up for you. So let's see. So I'm going to be using Burp Suite for this. We've talked about it. We've used it, talked about it quite a few times, but just to reiterate again, Burp is a proxy tool. So it will take all my HTTP and HTTPS traffic and that stuff, send it through this application, and I can modify requests, I can craft requests, and all sorts of different cool things. And it's something Ram and I often use for testing. So here is what an XMLRPC request might look like. It would look like. And so what you have is a method name. So this is going to be our method that we're using. And for today's purposes, I'm just using get comments. And then you'll have a string, which is going to be your, I think it's the ID for your site or something. I can't remember off the top of my head. And then you'll have your,
Sorry,
Yeah.
I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh, no, you're
XMLRPC
fine.
does have some legitimate uses, though, right? Like,
Yes,
there are
correct.
still things that still use it for,
Yeah, I
legitimate
believe Jetpack
purposes.
is one that uses it for sure. And yeah, there's legitimate uses for it, but not everybody needs it. So it's one of those things that you should figure out if your site needs it or not. And if it does, and you would want to keep it enabled. And if you don't, then you would probably want to disable it. So for this demonstration, you have your username and then you have your password. And then for this, I have to specify a post ID because I'm getting comments. And then when I send this request, I get a incorrect username or password. And I can just keep changing the password as many times as I want and get incorrect username or password and just keep going. And then
So you could use this to log into a site then and like test
Theoretically,
username
yeah.
and password combinations.
Yeah.
And you could do this without knowing the WP admin URL, right?
Exactly. Yep. So if you
Okay.
hide the WP admin URL and you don't have XMLRPC disabled, an attacker can still use this method to try and log into your site and do certain things.
Okay, just checking because that's what it seems like what's happening here.
Yep. And so attackers really like to use this method.
And Ram and Chloe, these our brute force settings will keep an eye on these XML/RPC attempts, right? And it'll obey these settings. So if you have 5 pass or login attempts rather, and you see 5 quick XML/RPC attempts come over, that will get blocked. Is that right?
Yep.
Okay.
And so now that I have, let's pretend I brute forced a lot of stuff. And so now I've gotten to a point where I have the correct password and it's saying it's incorrect.
Do you have the 2FA required set up in login
I do.
security?
I
That
do.
might be it.
So let's deactivate two-factor authentication. There we go. And we go back. See, two-factor authentication is pretty important. And then we'll go ahead and send the request. And now I know that I have a legitimate password to use XMLRPC because I have this response that gave me the information that I was looking for, and it's not telling me incorrect username or password. So that's how XMLRPC works. It's one of those things that you don't really know exists on your site if you don't know about it or you don't have something that uses it. So it's kind of one of those background things that it's really important to become more aware about. And so I'm going to stop sharing my screen real quick, and I'm going to go back to Wordfence, the settings, and I wanted to show you that you can, let's see here, that you can disable XMLRPC if you are not using it. And so again, you're going to have to do a little bit of due diligence to make sure none of the plugins that you're using is using it. But if you go back over to those login security settings, I have my screen shared up here. All right, and so you can go to the settings tab and you can disable XMLRPC right here. And so if you save those settings and then we go back over to burp and we try and send that again, it's going to say XMLRPC services are disabled on the site. So attackers don't have that method to try and get on there. And then as you already saw, if you have two-factor authentication enabled, you will have to use two-factor authentication code. So that's another option that you can use if you want to keep XMLRPC enabled and use it manually and such. Yeah. Did I miss anything there, Ram?
I don't really think so. I mean, I guess the one thing one can bring up is that there are a few XMLRPC requests that don't require authentication, and these will still go through. And you know, if you absolutely don't use XMLRPC, if you're not using Jetpack, if you're not using the WordPress mobile app, if you're not using any sort of like third-party client to publish content on your WordPress site, then you can just delete the file. But make sure you don't need it before you do that. So. And Dave Harrington has a question for two-factor authentication, which is that you can bypass it for a static list of IP addresses. Yes, you can actually add your IP address to an allow list so that you don't have to provide two-factor authentication if your IP is on that list. There's 2 things you want to make very sure of before you do that. Number 1, make sure that you're, actually have a fairly static IP or an IP that doesn't change very often. And number 2, make sure that your site's IP detection settings are correct. Because, there are a few hosts out there where they'll be routing through several layers of proxies and content distribution networks, and eventually what the site detects as the remote IP can get mangled. This is a fairly rare occurrence, and we've put a lot of work into the plugin to making sure it doesn't happen. But every now and then we have seen hosts forget to add the remote visitor IP to one of the headers, and then there's nothing that we can really do to prevent that. So make sure that your site is accurately detecting remote IPs first.
And alongside, allow listing your IP, there's also an option to remember your device for 30 days in there as well. So make it a little bit easier to get into the site, and rather than putting the code in every time. So, as Ram mentioned at the top, Wordfence blocked 4.3 billion, over 4 billion attempts to exploit vulnerabilities in 2020. Ram, do you want to talk about some of the attacks that we saw and blocked throughout the year?
Sure. So when I say attacks against vulnerabilities, that means against specific weaknesses in WordPress plugins, WordPress core, WordPress themes. Part of the reason the number is so much lower than brute force attempts is that brute force attempts by nature kind of have to try a lot of times in order to have any success. Vulnerabilities, a lot of the time, you only have to try once or twice. And, if the site's vulnerable, it'll work. And if it's not, you move on. Or at least that's the idea. So the majority of these, about 43% of them, or 1.8 billion of them, were directory traversal attacks. Now, directory traversal attacks are basically anytime you have a plugin or a theme where, it accepts an input of, I want to look at a file that's here, or I want to look at a file that's there, you can sometimes use something called directory traversal. Clay, do you have a demo of this? I don't know.
Yeah, I'll show directory traversal in just a few minutes. Yeah.
Cool. But basically the idea is that you can use a sort of shorthand using, // and that'll move you up one or more directories. And sometimes you can use this to access restricted files like wp-config.php, which, if you can read the contents of that, then you can basically get database credentials, which in a lot of cases give you access to the database, which gives you access to the site. In other cases, if it's actually loading code from a file, if you can get depending on what you can upload, if you can upload an image that contains code or have it processed a certain way, you can sometimes get a web shell that way. Anyways, there's a lot you can do with it. Directory traversal and local file include are kind of two separate but extremely related things. You can use directory traversal to achieve local file inclusion, but they're not necessarily the same thing. But I think I'll let Chloe take the demo from here because it's pretty cool what you can do with it.
Yeah, so we're going to show you how I'll show you how the duplicator vulnerability that was discovered last year, and it's been patched for quite some time now, actually was a directory traversal vulnerability that allowed you to download arbitrary files from the server. So let me go ahead and share my screen real quick. There. And so if you go to WP Scan, you can look it up, and it's this duplicator vulnerability. It was being actively exploited at the time that it was discovered, but luckily the Wordfence firewall built-in protection actually blocked this attack before we learned about it, so that was really good. And so that's one of the reasons that you want a firewall. But just to show you real quick how easy it was and what a directory traversal attack would look like, you can go ahead and copy this proof of concept. If you want to exploit it on your own site, you can do that and have fun with it. But don't do it on anybody else's site because that is bad and illegal.
And we will block you.
Yeah. And so you go ahead and copy this proof of concept and you go over to this target site. And I'm going to go ahead and log out since we want to show that this can be done as an unauthenticated user. And you just append that to your URL up here. Paste. And so this is where the directory traversal plays in. So the file equals .wp-config. So basically, I'm able to traverse up one directory and snag that WP config file. And so once I hit enter, you'll see that it's downloaded down here. And I'm going to stop my screen just for a second so I can open that up real quick. Take a moment.
I see we have a
screen.
question about enforcing strong passwords. And we do have an option for that, right, Ram? Enforcing strong passwords. And I believe that this checks after or while you're updating your password. Is that right?
Yes, we can. Wordfence has an option to enforce strong passwords. It also has an options to make sure that your password is not on any breached lists, which is super useful.
And
Sorry,
so,
Chloe, I just wanted
oh no,
to
it's fine.
get that question.
Yeah. And so I've downloaded the WP config file and I was unauthenticated on the site. So an unauthenticated user was able to traverse up one directory and then install this file. And it contains the database user name, the password, and everything you need to connect to the database. From there, once an attacker gets access, they can, of course, create a new user, log into the site, and do all sorts of other bad things. And just while I'm looking at the WP config file, I just want to give you a little reminder that make sure that you have your authentication unique keys and salt set. So like right here, it says put your unique phrase here. Just a reminder to do that since I'm looking at the WP config file. And so that's how a directory traversal attack would look like, or what it would look like. And Wordfence would block that, and I'll show you that a little bit later, how that works.
So for anybody who's interested, looking at those salts and keys, Ram, Chloe, how frequently would you recommend swapping those out and regenerating them? And of course, if your site's attacked and you find your site compromised, that would be also a good time to go in and regenerate those, right?
Yes, definitely anytime your site is compromised or you think your site has been compromised. Apart from that, I mean, they're fairly cryptographically secure. You don't really need to swap them out all that often, unless you think someone has gotten in, in which case, please change them. Even so, it's still effortful to actually abuse them for an attacker, and they may have other ways in, but you really don't want to just sort of leave them hanging out when, if you're changing everything else, change those too.
Now, we went over a handful of different attacks there. Are there any others you'd like to cover, Ram, before we move on there?
Honestly, the second thing we saw in large quantities at 21% of all attempts was SQL injection. The little Bobby Tables joke, select from students, drop table students, that kind of thing. They're fairly common. And we had about 909 million attacks over the past year, so just under a billion. The good news is that WordPress typically runs on MySQL, so you can't usually stack queries with MySQL, which means that most most SQL injection vulnerabilities, unless they were specifically insert or delete or update vulnerabilities, could only be used to exfiltrate information. Now, one specific quality of SQL injection vulnerabilities is also that it typically takes a bunch of them in order to actually successfully exfiltrate info, just because, the attacker has to try a lot of things. So that does explain the volume to some extent. Nonetheless, when they're successful, they can be devastating. You can grab things like user email addresses and usernames and also hashed passwords. That's another reason why those salts are important. And the good news is that WordPress does salt them automatically if you don't enter in a salt. But if that salt wasn't there, it'd be fairly trivial to reverse passwords stolen by a SQL injection attack. The good news is that they are salted by default these days, so attackers that have exfiltrated passwords have a much harder time actually cracking them.
Now, what about malicious file uploads?
So that was the number 3 vulnerability we saw. And I don't know if you guys remember the file manager vulnerability, but that fell into that category. This is honestly probably the most impactful in the highest severity category of exploits. If you can upload a executable PHP file or something that will execute code onto a server, then you can do anything you want with the website on that server, and depending on underlying vulnerabilities in the host, you may be able to do whatever you want with the host as well. And these made up 11% of all attempts, with 454 attempts. And again, as we sort of go down the list, we go to things that take fewer and fewer tries. Like with a directory traversal vulnerability, you might still have to try a couple levels up and down, or you might not know the absolute path of the file you're trying to include and know the path structure of the site. So you might try it like 3 or 4 times before you get a hit on a site that's vulnerable. But with, malicious file uploads, you really only have to try once or twice on a site to see if it's vulnerable. So if that happens, then your site it's probably a good idea to back up your site fairly regularly so you can just restore it from scratch instead of trying to fix it. Though our site cleaning team will clean it if you don't have backups, or even if you do and you want to make sure that it's super clean. So, yeah.
Now, the number of blocks we made, I'm sure, is quite higher probably than last year. But these numbers, as far as what we're seeing from the directory traversal and the SQL injection, are these pretty similar of what we've seen over the years as far as percentage of attacks?
I do think that, honestly, I don't have access to significantly older data than this year. I have kept an eye on trends. I do think that some attackers have sort of brought some extra capacity online over 2020. We did see some huge attack spikes over 2020 that, I've written some articles about that, we haven't seen the same degree of capability from adversaries in the past. To the point where, we'd see certain days where over 1 million sites, like literally over a quarter of the people we protect, were attacked in a single day for something relatively minor. Like they're wasting resources because botnet capacity is so cheap. They're just like, hey, here's a plugin that has 3,000 installations. I'm going to test all 4 million sites that Wordfence is protecting to see if they're vulnerable for maybe 3,000 possible infected sites. Botnet capacity is cheap, and that's why we're seeing so many attacks. Attackers can just, throw stuff at the wall and see what sticks.
That is interesting. So can you explain to us what XSS is and where it came in on our list?
Crosssite Scripting was number 4, and it's my favorite vulnerability. So I'm actually going to let Chloe run with this, but it was 8% of all attempts with 330 million attacks, and it effectively lets an attacker run code in the victim's browser. Chloe, you want to provide a little more info?
Yeah, so Crosssite Scripting it's really fun to work with. It's relatively common to discover them, and easy to discover them. And so there's so many different things that you can do with it. We actually did a whole show on that 2 weeks ago. So if you're really interested in all the in-depth stuff about it, I recommend watching it. But you could do all sorts of different things. So like you can inject new administrative users. You can modify theme files. You can do anything an administrator can do by injecting Crosssite Scripting. You can redirect site visitors to malicious domains, all sorts of things. So basically what a Crosssite Scripting vulnerability is an attacker, or not an attacker, but I would say attacker, can inject malicious JavaScript or HTML, all sorts of different things. They can basically inject tags that can be used to inject scripts like JavaScript and whatnot to into a page. It can be reflected, stored, or DOM-based. So reflected is it's just reflected back once. It's not going to stay there. Stored is that it's going to be stored, and anytime you access that page that has that stored XSS, it will execute. And then DOM-based is a little more tricky. I have a hard time explaining that one because it's just so funky. Ram,
you did a really good job. You did a really good job explaining it during the show we did on XSS. Basically, as I remember it, you trick JavaScript that's already on the page into rearranging the site so that it runs your code instead of what it had intended to.
Yeah, so there. Yeah, that one's, it's funky, and yeah, I always get confused with DOM and reflected just because, yeah.
Sorry.
What?
Oh, I was going to say, I think we're going to cover one more of the vulnerabilities we saw, and then we're going to bring in a special guest.
Ooh, who is that?
Who could it be?
Who could it be? I don't know. But anyways, we do, the fifth most widely exploited vulnerability was authentication bypass vulnerabilities, basically where an attacker accessed something that only administrators were supposed to be able to access. And this was 3% of attempts with 140.8 million attacks. And it's kind of misleading to put in this category because there's a lot of, Crosssite Scripting vulnerabilities that are only possible because of authentication bypasses. There's a lot of malicious file uploads that are only possible because of authentication bypasses. But these were authentication bypass vulnerabilities that didn't already count in those categories. Things where, an attacker could update the options on a site to let new administrators register. And the thing about these is that these were so widespread that pretty much every single site on our network got hit by at least one of each of these attacks. It's really hard to sort of look at, the changing number of sites and the changing number of attacks. But when, total sites attacked for each vulnerability is roughly total sites protected, then you start seeing, wow, the attackers are really trying everything and throwing it at the wall and seeing what sticks. So let's bring on our special guest.
Yeah, so we have Mark Maunder joining us, the CEO of Wordfence and Defiant.
It's a pretty
Mark,
cool
how's it
lighting,
going?
and that's a pretty cool van.
Can you guys hear me all right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that was Sean making my background cinematics. A little bit pretentious. Sorry about that.
I like it. The van is
you guys
looking.
Do we
I
need
was
to
gonna
run
say-
the Inception sound for the cinematic backdrop?
I know. So that's our. Have you guys seen this? I think you saw the photos of the wrap that we put on there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's going to
so,
be fun to see out and about at WordCamps. in the
Yeah,
future, once
yeah.
we get out again.
This is our mobile film unit, so we're busy. We finished the exterior now, and oh hey Sean, and we are busy doing the interior. But it's a 10 kilowatt power system that we can use for foam lights wherever we go, which is kind of nice. And apparently my lighting isn't bright enough, so someone just turned that up for me. Thanks, buddy. But cool. So I know we've got some other stuff we want to chat about, but I was just reading. Have you seen the article on Hacker News, Ram, about the GAN faces kind of pretending to be real people criticizing Belgium's stance against Chinese 5G providers?
I haven't seen that particular article, but I am aware of GAN faces and how that they're getting harder and harder to spot.
Yeah. I mean, I tend to be maybe more optimistic than others during times of great change, but there's so much going on, and like what we just mentioned is generative adversarial network faces that are generated by a generative adversarial network AI. So it's basically two neural networks competing against each other and creating faces that look like real people, but that don't actually exist, and are being used for fake social media accounts. And the company that did that was that did this research was Graphica, and they've done quite a bit of research into this. They're I think DARPA funded. Anyway, it's on the Hacker News right now if you want to grab the link. It's kind of an interesting article, but it all of these new attacks and changes that are happening and so on. I mean, I see it as presenting opportunity. I mean, this is now a new industry of creating software that can recognize GAN faces and eject them from Twitter or remove them from your feed or whatever. So interesting times we live in. That's for sure.
It is.
Yeah, I hadn't seen that. And you mentioned that's on Hacker News right now.
Yeah, I think it's one of the top articles. So it's kind of fun. Not that that's our space or anything, but I suppose it's a little bit related to what we recently published. Has Greg's article on ML gone out yet?
Not yet, but we're hoping soon. We have some pretty cool news, so stay tuned for later today or tomorrow because we're doing some really cool stuff in a not entirely unrelated field.
Right, yeah. Not to steal Greg's thunder or anything, but there's a really great article that one of our colleagues, Greg, put together on how we're deploying machine learning inside Wordfence to better recognize emerging malware variants. And it's a good one, so check it out.
Yeah, if you're not on the mailing list, go over to the wordfence.com page and get your email on there because you will be notified whenever that post goes out, and it will be soon. So you will get a message for that.
Yeah, it
ahead.
turns out machine learning is not a replacement for skilled analysts, but it is a heck of a force multiplier for them.
Yeah, I'd say that's a pretty good summary, Ram. It's interesting, I was doing a project over the weekend that I can't talk about, but I can't sort of share the details, but I needed GPU resources for it, and they were remarkably hard to come by. Apparently, everyone is renting cloud GPU resources right now, either for, I'd imagine, cryptocurrency or AI projects or graphics rendering and so on. So it's a very popular and growing space, I guess.
Indeed.
Now it looks like Sean has our winners graphic for the swag contest. So we got Tim, and that's not Tim Cantrell, our customer support
Sure, it's
lead.
not Tim
So
Cantrell.
Not sure if I believe that. Nell, George, Powell, and Robert, as well as Tim, won there. So there's our 5 winners, and congratulations to you all there for submitting the correct answer. Now that the swag question there was to do with XMLRPC, and the question was, why does hiding the WordPress login page not stop brute force login? And if you missed that, you can go back and check out what Chloe demoed for you there, showing the capability there and why you should consider disabling that.
Do you think we should go over the rest of the report? I think we can get through it pretty quick.
Sure.
Yeah. Just want to kind of cover, we also looked at what malicious files WordPress or Wordfence found on sites. We actually found over 70 million malicious files on 1.2 million WordPress sites, a number that coincides, not coincidentally, with how many new installations we have. I think a lot of people installed Wordfence for the first time in order to troubleshoot some weird behavior, and we found some malware on their sites, and most of them managed to clean it up. So the biggest threat we saw was nulled plugins and themes. So we've discussed this in the past, but nulled plugins and themes are effectively pirated premium versions of plugins and themes that are available for free with a catch from various sketchy sites. And that catch happens to be that most of them will install a backdoor on your site when you install them. Some of them even have that in the terms of services, that you agree to let us modify your site however and whenever we want by installing any of these things. So the biggest one we saw was something that we've written articles about in the past called WPVCD. It's fairly widespread. We actually found it on 13% of all infected sites in 2020. That's 154,000 sites. And overall, we found an old plugin or a theme or malware from one, at least, on over 200,000 sites, which was 17% of all infected sites in 2020. So, yeah, don't install null plugins or themes. It's not worth it because they are really one of the largest infection vectors out there, and it is much harder to protect a site from an administrator who's installing the malware themselves than it is to protect against an external attacker. And I mean, insider threat is one of the biggest things that most organizations face. So if you have an organization or if you have a site that has more than one administrator, make sure to educate everyone who has administrative access to your site to make sure they don't do something like this to save a buck, because it will cost you.
Definitely good to take note of there. And we talked about before the 4.3 billion vulnerability exploit attempts, and the takeaway there, Ram, is, get the firewall activated on your site and ideally get it optimized, right?
Yeah, I want to say we deployed something like 108 firewall rules in 2020. Like Chloe and I were pretty busy. Like literally almost every other day, it's like, oh hey, one of us either found something or someone out there found something. It's like, time to write a firewall rule, time to protect our users, get it out to our premium customers, usually within 24 hours. And yeah.
Yeah, if you're ever wondering what Ram and Chloe are doing when they're not here on live, they are finding vulnerabilities and getting them fixed and getting firewall rules out. So, that's one of the benefits of being a premium member. You're getting those firewall rules very quickly when Ram and Chloe and the rest of the threat intel team are finding these issues and either way, whether you're free or premium, if you're on the mailing list, once we find these and everything gets patched and fixed from the plugin authors, we're sending out the mail there to help you even more. If you're a free user at that point, you can decide to get rid of the plugin on your site or go ahead and find a replacement. If you're a premium user, you're protected from the firewall rules at that point as well. So Ram, we covered most of what we planned on covering here. Is there anything else you would like to go over, Chloe
Sure.
or Ram?
Sure, just that, if you are a premium user, you get access to Scott's favorite feature, which is the block list. And we actually blocked 2.5 billion attacks over 2020 from IPs that were on the block list. About 628,000 IPs ended up on the block list over the course of 2020. Now we update that frequently. So, IP starts misbehaving, it goes on the block list, it stops misbehaving, it gets removed. And this is one reason why, permanently blocking IPs isn't all that useful, because most of the time these IPs are, just temporarily taken over by an attacker. But yeah, it is worth it. That's an extra 2.5 billion attacks blocked. So just by our premium users.
Yeah, it's kind of surprising how often I still see folks saying, well, I have my favorite list of IPs that I like to block, that I want to import, and it's a static list that they don't sort of update or anything like that. And you can't do it that way. It's IPs that are attacking WordPress sites are usually infected by some attacker, and they get cleaned eventually, and those then are hosting real things or are real proxy servers or VPN gateways and so on, and you're blocking a lot of legitimate traffic if you're using a static list to do your blocking, right, Ren?
That's correct. We did get a question of, from Ruth Witter, and for free plugins, only get them from the repository. For paid plugins, get them from either the author site or there are a few established legitimate marketplaces like Envato Marketplace. Code Canyon is typically a trusted source. There's a few others, but most of the time, for any sort of premium plugin, don't get any free versions of a premium plugin is really the thing. So.
And if null is in the domain name, it's you should avoid it.
Yes, there's a new trend for like GPL plugins. It's like these plugins are GPL listed. They're licensed to be free, and therefore we're redistributing them for free. Which that's something that we probably shouldn't get into in this episode. But as a general rule, just because the code is GPL licensed doesn't mean the assets are.
We had a question earlier from Paul, and I'm not sure if we got to it, about how hackers know usernames that exist on a site.
Usually from data breaches. Right. Or, a lot of people leave their username as admin or administrator. Or, you read the author's name. There are author name scans if the administrator is the one writing authors. And yes, Wordfence does block it, though there are cases where you may not want to block that. There's a whole number of ways that attackers can find out usernames. One should just generally not treat usernames as privileged or secret information. They're just expect everyone to know your username.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, I believe, I'm not sure if you mentioned it or not, we have an option in Wordfence's in the all options area that will disable the ability to see the author pages there and find usernames that way. So that is one thing to consider enabling as well. So we got a few minutes here before we head over to the Clubhouse app, and hopefully some of you are joining us there. Mark, anything you would like to cover before we start to wind down here?
No, I was just thinking about the breach list that Ram was mentioning, and I used one over the weekend to do some legitimate authorized work. And I actually ended up being successful with a 4 GPU Linode box. The only one I could get was out in India, in Mumbai, and I used a breach list that was 1/64th the size of the big list that I had, and it was successful. So I downloaded it. In fact, I downloaded the big list and the smaller one via torrent in a few minutes, and then with the GPU cluster, I was able to crack a not trivial password in about 8 minutes. And so it is, if you are reusing passwords at this point, you're not making good choices. So
use a password manager. That was my
right.
gift to myself over the holidays, is I got myself a password manager and used it for everything and spent like 2 days updating all of my passwords.
Yeah, there you go.
Yep. As Rim mentioned earlier in the show, get a good complex password, and then you can rely on the 2FA as an additional layer of security on top of that, and really lock things down. So let's get into winding down here. Again, we appreciate everybody stopping by on Tuesdays and joining us here on live, and we're excited that we get to share some news with you all the time, like we did today with the K through 12 program. So if you missed that earlier, we'll be posting some links to that in the chat, and we had a blog post out about that. Mark, while you're here, we're working hard on fast or slow. Can you give us a little overview on fast or slow for anybody who maybe not be utilizing that at the time?
Yeah, for sure. We're actually, it's funny, like I know what we're working on, but I'm not 100% sure what's been launched yet and what hasn't been launched. And so it's like, I'm not 100% sure, therefore, what I can talk about and what I can't, but maybe I'll just talk about stuff that hasn't been launched yet. So Fast or Slow is obviously our performance benchmarking service. It tests your website performance from 18 locations around the world. We're using headless browsers on servers in data centers in cities around the world. And so we're actually simulating the amount of time it takes to render pages, right up until the CPU is idle. So it's like from first DNS lookup to initial TCP connection to server delivering first bytes to the page beginning to render within the browser, to the final render, to when the CPU is actually idle and the page is like fully interactive. It gives you that from 18 cities around the world at the same time. It's like pretty amazing. I mean, it's something that we've wanted for a long time, but we've actually done a lot more work on it, and a lot of that work isn't public. And one of the things we're doing is playing with the ability to run our own benchmarks on huge numbers of sites in parallel. It's amazing what you can do when you have on-demand cloud resources that you pay for by the second. It's super fun, and we'll be publishing some research based on that coming shortly. And then we've also got some new features that are coming out, and I don't think they've been announced yet, but they're in QA and they will be imminent. And I think everyone listening to the show is going to like them very much. So keep an eye on Fast or Slow. We'll announce it on the blog. We might send it out to the Wordfence mailing list as well, just because it's relevant to WordPress site owners. Performance improves conversions, improves SEO, and generally puts a smile on everyone's faces. So we'll be chatting about that soon. Guys, are we going to bomb Clubhouse? Are we? Is that the plan? Are we nuking Clubhouse today?
Yeah, we're gonna DOS it. Like not actually DOS it, but
Yeah. So it's invite only right now. Can I chat about Clubhouse a little bit?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. And I don't mean to be like the dork that's oh, there's a new social network that everyone should join, because there's plenty of social networks popping up every single day. But this is particularly transformative, I think, for a few different reasons. Firstly, I was a phone freak back in the early 90s, which means that I used to hack phone lines in South Africa, totally illegal, and connect to. So what I'd do is I would call a 1-800 number in South Africa that would connect me to a operator, an AT&T operator in the US. And so I basically called a toll-free number that has connected me to a US phone line or person. And then I'd send a cease tone through the line. It was a combination of 2600 and 2400, and I would take control of the operator's trunk over on the US side. And then I would use tones that are not DTMF tones like your regular old school phone, but I would use CCITT5 tones, which is the international phone signaling system, and I think it might still be used actually to place a call anywhere in the world. And I could route those calls via underwater cable or satellite or whatever I wanted to do. And so what me and a bunch of other hackers would do back then was we would all call what's called a bridge, which is you call a bridge and there's silence, but if someone else calls that same bridge, you can talk to each other. So it's like this conference infrastructure that AT&T used to have. And so we would all call into a bridge illegally and internationally, and I ended up developing these relationships with people around the world that were also hackers, and I just knew them by voice. And I actually ended up meeting one of the guys, and it was like the weirdest experience. I've been friends with him for like 3 years, maybe more, and we met for the first time, and it was like, oh, like that's what you look like, you know. But so I ended up like developing these deep friendships with people that I just knew by voice, and for me that kind of validated the voice only model. And so in our company, which is 100% remote, we don't use video conferencing very much. We use it. We're using it now. Obviously, we can see each other. But most of our meetings are done using voice only over something called TeamSpeak, which is amazing because it's push to talk. So you just, guys, it's like the top of the hour. So can we just like go over schedule? Is that cool?
Yeah.
Sure.
The only thing waiting for us is the clubhouse. So.
Okay. All right. We'll get in there in a second. So anyway, we've been using TeamSpeak, which is voice only, and it's push to talk, which is amazing because you can have 20 people on there and with background noise, and you're not interrupted by the background noise because the person who is speaking has to hold down push to talk. Clubhouse is a voice only social network. And so I've seen this model work in the early 90s. I've seen it work for our team for the last 5 years, where all of our meetings are voice only, and it adds back that emotional context that you lose with text only on Twitter. And I'm telling you, like, this is healthy. This is like food, you know, this social network, because it is healing a lot of rifts that have been manifesting on Twitter, which you guys have seen, right? This sort of like cold, hard reality of just text where there's you can't hear me, you know, the emotion in my voice and so on. And so I've been connecting with folks on Clubhouse in a pretty big way and making new friends because I create an emotional connection. I have an emotional connection with someone else. And those friends are then translated into other, you know, phone calls or, you know, other forms of communication. And so it's super cool. And I think it's also super healthy. And I think it's actually going to be bigger than Twitter and potentially Facebook. It's invite only right now. When you join, you get 2 invites. So I think what we want to do is sort of coordinate gaming the system a little bit on Twitter. I'm not sure what you guys have planned with Kathy, but is it something along those lines?
Yeah, it looks like we got the hashtag WordPress Clubhouse right now, and whether you have an invite or you're looking for one, that is the hashtag to use, and you can connect with somebody who potentially has some invites there, and then you can search Wordfence, I believe, right, Mark, in Clubhouse, and ours should come up.
Yeah, or if you're following Kathy or myself or one of our other team members on Clubhouse, I think the room will pop up as like a recommendation. It did for me this morning. But yeah, you can search for Wordfence and it should show up as well. So should we, what do you guys think? Should we wrap and then head over to Clubhouse? And then what we'll do for anyone watching is, Scott, I think you said is it WordPress Clubhouse?
Yep, hashtag WordPress Clubhouse.
Okay, so we'll do hashtag WordPress Clubhouse on Twitter. If you have invites, you know, mention on Twitter using that hashtag, hey, I have Clubhouse invites. If you need an invite, do the same thing. Get on Twitter and say, you know, I need an invite. And then what we'll do is coordinate via DM to get that to you. Is the process kind of giving someone your phone number, Scott?
I believe that's what would need to happen there. So you would have to likely DM somebody and do the exchange that way. Right.
So you know, if you're not comfortable doing that, then it's cool. But I think I might have 2 invites left, so you can kind of DM me your phone number. I add it as a contact, and then you show up in Clubhouse for me, and I can invite you. And then anyone else on Twitter, you know, you're going to have to DM someone who does have an invite your phone number. They'll add you as a contact, and they'll invite you, and then we'll just kind of keep it going for as long as we can. So cool. All right, Scott, I'll hand it back to you, and you can wrap it, and we'll head over there.
All righty. Before we get started here, we have one question, simple question. Does Wordfence charge monthly or by the year? You can get Wordfence Premium for $99 for a year, and that is charged one time, and that's for the entire year. There's no monthly option. Though if you have a staging or a development site, you can use the same license there as well for $99. If you purchase multiple licenses initially, you're going to get a discount. If you're not joining us over at Clubhouse, head over to fastorslow.com. Mark just told you all about it. You can go over, put your website URL in, and look at the metrics that we provide there. It is really cool. As he said, we're working on some stuff there. If you want to be the first to hear about it, and later today we have another post coming out as well that we teased earlier. If you want to get that immediately, you're going to want to go to wordfence.com and get onto our mailing list if you're not already. Chloe and Ram are no strangers to the mailing list. They are finding stuff all the time, and mail is getting sent out. So if you want to be the first to hear about it, get over to the mailing list and get signed up. We will be back next Tuesday. We have a really awesome show planned, so stay tuned to that. You can hit the like button if you enjoyed this show. Otherwise, hit the subscribe button and hit the bell. You're going to be notified when we go live next Tuesday. We got a good one scheduled for you, so be sure to take a look out for that. And join us for the lunch hour at 12 Eastern Time. 9 a.m. Pacific. I think we are getting ready to head over to Clubhouse. So if you have not already checked on Twitter and tried to get your invite, now is the time. Use the hashtag WordPress Clubhouse, and we will hopefully see you over there here in just a few minutes. Anything before we head out here? Ram, Mark, Chloe? Chloe, I
Thanks
see
for
you're
watching.
muted. I think your cats are going nuts, right? I saw some cats jumping around in the background there.
Awesome.
Yeah, they're just making noises and they're perfectly behind my head, so you can't see them, but all I hear is them. Yeah, they're playing.
That's why you've been sitting so still right there.
Yeah,
I think.
I'm really trying to hold my composure because I just wanted to bust out laughing.
Okay, we're going to get out of here, but we will be back next Tuesday to see all of you. And from all of us here at Wordfence, we appreciate you taking the time to join us and hang out and send your questions over. So we will be back soon, and you'll be hearing from us on the mailing list in the meantime. So we'll be back next Tuesday, and we'll see you then. We're heading over to Clubhouse right now, and we will talk to you there. So we'll see you here shortly, and thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for watching.
Bye, everyone.